Our second topic in algebra is substitution, which is where we're going to start looking at the core principles of algebra and how we can use them. We've already established that x represents an unknown number. Now, this means it could take any value at all. We call this a variable because it can vary. Now we're going to look at how algebra behaves when we substitute a value in for our x. Now, what does substitute mean? Let's imagine this situation, which some of you will be familiar with. So to some of you, substitute will mean swapping players on a football pitch or a netball pitch or some other kind of pitch. So, substitution in algebra is slightly similar. Let's begin with a very simple example. If I have 2x, I could then say, what is the value of this when x equals 4? Now, 2x is what we call an expression. That means it can hold any value, because x could be 4, it could be 6, or it could be 10. Later on we'll see what happens when something like 2x is equal to a set value, forming an equation. That's for later. So, what is the value of 2x when x equals 4? Well, what does 2x actually mean? It means 2 multiplied by x. So, it means 2 times 4 in this case, which means it's 8. Now 2x isn't always worth 8. It will vary or it will change depending on the value of x. So when we use the word variable earlier, it's because it can change. So if x equals 6, let's have a look what happens. 2x is 2 times x, which is 2 times 6, which is 12. You'll notice how I'm setting this out here. I'm taking the expression, writing it out longhand. I'm then here substituting the number in for the value. Then I calculate afterwards. So I write out, I then substitute, I then calculate. Trying to show my steps clearly will make this much easier later on, especially, for example, if you find there's an error that you're trying to fix. Let's look at another example. Okay, in this example, I've got two different variables, two different letters, two different things that can change. So, I'm going to tell you that x equals 4 again, and that now y equals a half. Now, don't be scared by the sight of a fraction. If you need to, go and watch a video on fractions to help you with that. But in this case, I have made the fraction rather generous. If you can't see why, watch now. So, 3x minus 5 plus 2y equals 3 times x, take away 5, plus 2 times y. So these two terms have been written out longhand to remind ourselves. That was stage 1. Okay. Stage 2. Let's now substitute. X has become 4, y has become a half. Let's have a look then at what this gives us. Hang on a second. I've got lots of operations here. This is confusing. There must be some kind of rule to follow. Can you remember what that rule is? So, BIDMAS. We do division and multiplication before we do adding and subtracting. Now there's a good explanation of this on the adding and subtracting and mixed number videos for fractions. So, division and multiplication first. 3 times 4 is 12. Now this is not division or multiplication, so I'm going to leave it. I'm going to do this first. 2 times a half. Now some of you will be panicking thinking, I can't remember how to times fractions. But actually this one is very kind. Here's a half, and here's a half. So what do 2 halves make? That's right, they make a whole. Then we take our minus 5 and bring that down to the next line. Like before, any calculation we're not doing, we continue down the page with. And you can see each step has lined up, nice and clear. Now you'll get used to setting out like this after a couple of questions, but do keep doing it, because as the expression gets more and more complicated, you're going to find that that is really useful. So 12 take away 5. That's 7. Now I'm going to add the 1 on straight away and make 8. So I think it's time we looked at a slightly more difficult example. Now I'm not going to introduce anything here on the lines of negative numbers or fractions, but I am going to introduce something else. As you can see, there are indices in this question. So, I'm going to say that x holds a value of 5. So, how do we write this out longhand? Write out longhand, substitute, calculate. So 3x squared is 3 times x multiplied by another x. There's your x squared. A recap on the simplifying algebra video will help here if you're unsure. Then you've got 5x, which is 5 times x. And then that plus 6 on the end, where because there is no variable, no x or y or any other letter, we just keep it as it is. So that's 3 times 5 times 5 plus 5 times 5 plus 6. Substitution complete. So I'm going to do 5 times 5 first, which is 25. I might write that small here, or I might do an extra line of working. It's up to me. But because 3 times 25 I can work out, and I can do it by adding, or I can do it by multiplying, it's 75. Add another 25. Why didn't I add first? Can you remember what we did just now? Why did I go straight to the multiplication? That's right, bid maths. Well done if you spotted that. That's 106 when I add them all together, because 75 and 25 makes 100. In our next video we'll do more, where you've got some indices, and we'll start to introduce fractions and negative numbers.